Hi there, Chris here with another fresh tip for you all. In this video, we are going to continue our look at playing with the new contrast paints and reformulated shade washes. And in this video, we are going to continue our look at applying color on top of a metallic base. The model has been primed using Leadbelcher spray from Citadel. We're going to use Sigvald Burgundy as part of our example today, and we're going to use a medium shade brush to apply this. As you can see, I'm using the color straight from the pot, loading the brush not too heavily, but enough to get things happening. I'm going to get started on the foot. As the previous examples, I started on the upper portion of the marine. Well, this time I'm going to start on the lower portion, just for giggles. Here you can see I'm simply applying the color in a typical fashion. I'm not applying it in the usual fashion in which we apply contrast paints, where basically we apply it in a fairly heavy fashion. I'm using it in a fairly moderate fashion, kind of like if we had thinned out regular opaque color and began applying it to the surface with the intention of applying multiple coats. I'm also going to have a bit of fun here. I'm going to do a bit of a bifurcated color scheme on this guy, just for giggles, as it was suggested in the comments in the previous videos of testing this Burgundy out on a marine. Once it's dry, you can see here it finishes fairly matte. It also covers up quite a bit of the metallic, but some of the metallic does poke through. Now, it is fairly uneven because, as you may notice, that I was going through it fairly quickly. I was not being too careful how I was applying it. I was just going for fast coverage, which I think is what a lot of newer and experienced painters will do, and so it's best to see what kind of results you're going to get. I'm going to take 2 drops of contrast medium. I keep it in a dropper bottle just for ease of use. I'm going to take a fairly generous amount onto my brush and mix this into the medium. It is roughly like a 1-to-1 mix ratio. It's probably a little less than 1-to-1, but it's a rough estimate as far as, because I mean, like, I'm drawing it off the brush and that's not entirely accurate. But as long as you're consistent about how much you gather onto your brush, as far as like how far up the bristles you go, and you'll get fairly consistent results when you are doing this. Again, consistency breeds proficiency. And you can see I'm just simply applying it. I'm going to try and be fairly deliberate as I get to the helmet and the chest and the codpiece and the little, I don't know, what's that armor called on the backside, on his rear end, as it were. Anyway, you can see here I'm just simply using the color, and because we have it fairly thinned out, I am applying it sort of basically not haphazardly, but fairly generously on the surface so that it pools into the recesses, but also just kind of gives us a slight tint on the main portions. Here down the backpack, I'm simply just gonna, basically apply the color down halfway of the backpack. Again, like I said, this is kind of a bifurcated color scheme, sort of like names of chapters are escaping me at the moment. So, fill in the gaps as you want. Again, this is fairly rough coverage, and this is just on the upper portion of the marine. We're going to set it aside, allow it to dry, and then once it's dry, you can see how it looks now. You can see it's quite different from the leg, how straight out of the pot it covers quite easily and, obscures a lot of the metallic, whereas the upper portion, you can see a lot of metallic shining through. And if we were a little bit more deliberate about how we were applying it in recesses, things like that, we definitely could have made that work to our advantage. Here I'm going to take another layer, and I'm only going to cover the foot and about halfway up the shin and the back of the calf area. This is just to demonstrate 2 layers on the surface of, on top of the metallic. And again, this is just to demonstrate basic coverage and what you get with various coverages, as far as like how many layers we're applying on and everything like that. So you can see there, I just only went halfway up the leg, and we're going to set that aside, allow that to dry. And now you can see actually the little step where we stopped, the little watermark, as it were. And once you applied it in 2 layers, it's pretty much like you don't see any metallic. I mean, under these lights, you can still see a little hint of the metallic shining through it, but otherwise, no, it's really quite dark. To the eye, this looks very, very dark. So once that is dry and ready to go, we're going to come in with Leviathan Purple. This is a new purple color from the updated Citadel Contrast. We're going to take a little bit onto our palette, or onto our brush. Pretty much what we did last time. We're not, overly saturating the area. We're just taking, about halfway up the bristles, and we're basically going to begin applying this onto the area where we want. And again, we're going to kind of have a bit of fun with our bifurcated color scheme, and we're just going to look for even coverage across the areas here. And I'm applying this again in a somewhat typical fashion in which a lot of people will be using this particular paint, where you're applying it, again, fairly generously, but not too heavily. It actually, with contrast paints, you do end up applying it fairly heavily on surfaces. You get a lot on your brush and you just kind of move the paint around, and that actually makes the overall finished result actually look pretty darn good. When you apply it kind of like how you would a thinned out opaque color, you end up missing spots and you get kind of blotchiness, and it's actually, contrast paint actually likes to be applied fairly heavily. Once it's dry, you can see here how it really looks. And again, to the eye, this looks very, very dark. Under the lights, you can still see a bit of that metallic shining through. And I think that's actually really darn cool. And it made me really excited for this next demonstration portion, where basically we are going to take some of the medium, thin it down like we did on the upper portion on the other side of the marine. So we're going to take 2 drops of our technical contrast medium from Citadel. I'm going to put 2 little drops onto the palette, and then we're going to take just a fairly generous amount into the bristles, about halfway up the bristles. You can see there, again, this is kind of like a 1-to-1. It's probably, again, a little less than 1-to-1, a little less paint than medium. It's more medium than it is paint. We're going to apply this fairly generously over the areas. Again, you can see how, as I applied it, you could see how the trim of the shoulder pad just disappeared. You can see under the reflection how, that's how heavy that amount we're applying it here. But again, you take a fairly generous amount on your bristles, and then you move that amount around. You don't just hit the shoulder pad and then grab another amount and then, apply it to another area. You move that paint around and, make that saturation work for you. It's just being efficient with your use of color. And, again, when we are thinning out the colors, we are extending the amount of paint that we use. But mind you, though, because we've thinned out the color, we may have to apply more than 1 layer. But for demonstration purposes, we're just going to leave it as is. Of course, the camera goes out of focus when I really want to demonstrate something, especially on the helmet here. But again, I'm just being fairly careful. And for everybody else out there doing this kind of, emulating this kind of thing on their miniatures, you are going to take more care onto how you do apply it, as I'm just kind of quickly working my way through. But we're going to set it aside, allow it to dry, and then you can see how nice this looks. Now, even to the eye, this actually looks really darn cool. It actually looks a bit like Emperor's Children from Horus Heresy. And so I'm thinking, an Emperor's Children Horus Heresy color scheme actually might look pretty darn cool, like this metallic purple with gold trim and everything like that. So, but I'm getting sidetracked here. So we're going to take another amount onto our brush, and we're going to demonstrate the same thing like we did on the other leg, where we're going to put another layer down. So I'm only going to go about halfway up the leg, just so that we can demonstrate how much this covers on top of the metallic. And again, this is really just to demonstrate coverage and, the kind of results you are going to get, so that, anybody out there who's, expecting one thing and, not seeing it, you kind of know what's happening. So you can see here, you can still see how much of the area looks fairly opaque. It almost looks like we use an opaque color on top of that. And I mean, these new contrasts, some of them are more opaque than they are transparencies. But I think that was the point for these paints. And I mentioned it in the previous videos, as far as, demonstrating how these opaque colors will sit on top of other colors and things of that nature. But that is it. Sigvald Burgundy and Leviathan Purple on top of Leadbelcher spray. Big thank you to my patrons. Without their support, these videos would not be possible. If you're considering Patreon support, click the link in the description below and you'll be taken off to a magical website called Patreon, where there's various tiers of support, and a huge thank you to everybody for their continued support. Take care of your brushes, and they will take care of you.